Great. So welcome today, and thank you for Ellie to joining us. So I'm joined by Ellie Rich Poole, who's the recruitment coach. She helps leaders find their perfect role and then be brilliant in it, playing with their strengths. She's lived in UK, Germany, Chile, and Singapore, which is where we met. So I thought a great person to chat about our adventures and learnings along the way. So thank you, Ellie, for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Jo.
So when you moved to Singapore and you started up your business there, what were some of the things you learned about doing business that was maybe different from what you'd experienced before?
Oh yeah, no, Singapore is an absolutely wonderful place, but I did learn that it's culturally, it's very much of a sort of a place you have to respect the rules and regulations and the processes, and you have to be very patient because sometimes things do take longer than they might in other places. And it's certainly a culture of it's not somewhere you can do the seek forgiveness rather than permission type of place. So I would advise with somewhere like Singapore, it's important to do your research and find out the things you need to do, and then take steps to do those things properly and thoroughly and professionally. And I called upon an expert company actually that support expats setting up businesses to ensure I'd done everything sort of legally, and there's all those regulations you want to make sure you're following. So I would say definitely draw on the resources of experts and make sure you're sort of following the rules, so to speak.
Yes, it's definitely a rules-based culture.
Yes, yeah, it's not a place to go and be a rebel.
Definitely not. And how did you find interacting with people there and building the business?
Oh, do you know, it was a great place. I was sorry not to be able to spend more time in Singapore, actually, and even with the challenges of the time we were there. So we arrived in January 2020. I think the week we got there, Wuhan was in lockdown, and there was this whole, pandemic before we even knew it was a pandemic starting. So the 18 months that we were there were very impacted by the changes in how people were doing business and how people were interacting. But actually, even with that, I've built such a wonderful network of people, both, people that went on to be clients of mine, but also friends and just, sort of general contacts. And I would say, even though the method of meeting people moved online and things differed and, became smaller groups, the principles still remained the same. And my advice would be always ask for help. So before I went to Singapore, I put a note out on my LinkedIn to all of my network globally and just said, I'm going to be moving to Singapore. Does anybody know anybody? If you think there's anybody that might like to connect with me, please put us in touch. And then I really thoroughly followed that up. So kind of reached out to everyone, had lots of coffee meetings before they locked us down, and then lots of Zoom meetings afterwards. And really followed up. I think you have to be quite brave and just put yourself out there and not be afraid to ask for help, both from your existing network, but then when you meet people, it's okay to ask for help. And I think particularly from the global expat community, there is a real spirit of we've been there before and we'll pay it forward. And I found that to be the case. And I myself followed that principle, and there's people that come in after you, just helping people learn, the way things work, and introducing people and so forth. So, but actually, despite the pandemic, built a wonderful network, for the business, but also for good friends. So yeah, it's definitely doable.
Yes, and I joined shortly after that and benefited from your welcoming into
Well, we
Singapore.
met. You could still do it. So apart from the very strict lockdown, we could do one-to-one meetings. And actually, I did lots of kind of meeting an individual for a coffee or meeting for a walk in the Botanic Gardens. And I think, people were really open to that. I did lots of kind of talking meetings, which was fantastic in a place like Singapore, because you got to get out there in amongst the wonderful flora and fauna and just, sort of soak it all up whilst getting to know people, which was brilliant.
And how about coaching in Singapore? Did you find it different to when you'd been coaching maybe in the UK or elsewhere?
So I think the principles of it all were the same. What I found very interesting, I worked with a number of individuals from, you know, different nationalities, and I always do, but being there, you know, on the ground, I got to work with some Singaporeans, also some individuals, you know, in Vietnam and, you know, other sort of Asian locations. And it was really interesting. The thing that stood out to me about Singapore that is definitely different to UK or maybe American type of cultures, and it links to that sort of the way you get things done. They were very much more hierarchical and bureaucratic organizations. And, you know, speaking to coachees, but also speaking to friends of mine, it's very different. You know, I think if you're in a global company in the UK, we're all raised to kind of challenge. We would challenge a leader, you know, constructively and professionally. But if I was in a meeting and I had a question for the chief executive, or I didn't agree with something that one of the leaders has said, I would feel comfortable to raise that and challenge them as appropriately. But I absolutely, you know, I've come from the school of, you know, like, you know, manage upwards, have those conversations, and it's that bit is very different. I heard of people who were being taken aside and you know, and told off by line managers for suggesting improvements to processes. You know, they were sort of, that was viewed as negative, and they were getting negative feedback for kind of rocking the boat, when what they were doing was actually suggesting a process improvement. And it was basically, the feedback was, it's not your place, that's not your role. And I supported a number of individuals who were, you know, this was their day-to-day environment that they were living in, and it was very eye-opening coming from more of a Western culture. You know, I grew up in the retail industry in the UK, and you know, it wasn't the sort of place where you had to sit quietly in the corner. In fact, you probably wouldn't get on if you were sort of using that method of communication. And it's really interesting. And I would say definitely, you know, the positives of the culture, of course, are that people are very respectful, and they're very, you know, gentle with their feedback and so forth. The negatives are that because people don't want to offend, and you know, there's the concept of people, you know, that you want your boss to save face, you don't want them to sort of be embarrassed. Therefore, the pace of change is extremely slow, and it does surprise me. I was always constantly surprised that Singapore's seen as a very forward-thinking global hub. Lots of tech firms have got presence there, but yet the traditional culture and the way that people are raised in Singapore is to not rock the boat. So for me, that was definitely at odds. You know, those things didn't go hand in hand for me, and I thought it was really interesting getting to learn more about that.
Yeah, and I guess I came from the UK, and similar to you, but via China. So probably
gone
seen the
other side.
the other way and come back and thought Singapore was slightly more challenging than China had been in that point of view. There's certainly a big difference in how you then encourage people to speak up and find channels to bring ideas out, because the ideas are there. It's how do you find the way?
Oh, absolutely, very much so. And and I think and actually in some cases the answer for that individual was actually to move perhaps out of public sector into a private company, where actually they were able to be a bit more challenging, and you know, that they could see sort of routes to doing that, because certainly some of the very traditional you know, public sector bodies, I would be interested to see how you could ever really affect much change, unless you are someone at the top trying to lead the change, and then it might be a different matter.
So it's definitely a different career paths and approach to
yes,
what we used
absolutely.
to.
Yeah.
And is there anything, kind of having left and had time to reflect, that you particularly miss about Singapore, or maybe don't miss as well?
No, I do. I miss it massively, actually. I loved Singapore, and the thing I miss the most, which might sound strange because it's nothing to do with the kind of corporate world at all, I just miss the ambience of being in the jungle. I loved the warmth, and you know, some people found the heat overbearing, but I absolutely loved it. And I loved being able to just walk out and you're surrounded by the most impressive trees and flowers and animals. Goodness goodness me. I found a video on my phone this weekend of a monitor lizard, which I'd completely forgotten about seeing. And just, it's just completely different to the UK. So I do miss that. I don't miss the prices in Singapore. I still get a bit excited going to big Tesco now, even in this current climate we're living in, which I know, costs are increasing. It's all relative, and compared to being in Singapore where it's sort of $7 for a pot of hummus, that sounds so middle class, doesn't it? That you in Tesco $1.99 and in Singapore $7, and just that kind of those differences. But no, I miss the people, the friends I made, the locations. And I'm going back for a visit soon, which I'm extremely excited about.
I'm excited for you and jealous at the same time. I've got nothing planned.
Oh, yeah, no, I can't wait.
And from your move, and I guess not just this move, but other moves you've made, what are your sort of key tips or things to think about for people who maybe are thinking on a similar move, particularly into Singapore or more generally?
Yeah, no, Gillian. So of course, before Singapore, about 3 years before, we also were in Chile, which was another fantastic place. So I think when you're considering where you might wish to move to, I think there's probably some quite practical considerations. And I have to say, I've done Germany as well. Having now done a number of different locations, I would say if you don't speak the language, it is a much, much more challenging thing to do. And even though I constantly was having, so when I was in Chile, I constantly was having Spanish lessons throughout my whole time there. Unfortunately, I'm not blessed with that. I'm not somebody who can just pick up languages like that. So I never have been. And so after having done Germany and Chile, I made a bit of a promise to myself that I will absolutely do international locations again, but I'd like to do that in a country where the main language is English, just for my own, just for the ease of getting things done, because wheelie bins in German, there's a whole challenge there. Trying to find certain products when I was in Chile, so difficult. The good thing now is that at least Google Translate exists. Like I was in Germany pre that, but so I think language is key. And I think actually a point for the, if you're somebody who's going with a family or a partner or what have you, think about the implications for the other individuals as well. And actually, when on both of the trips, on the Chile and Germany, it was for my husband's role rather than mine, because I have my own business and so I'm quite portable. But you do need to reflect on the laws of being able to do business. If you have another half that has a career or wants to work or run their own business. So I think do your research into that. And then just really maximize the networks. There are some fantastic resources on different social media platforms. So Facebook groups were brilliant for me in both locations for finding new friends and for buying and selling things and for learning, how you get things done. And there's a Facebook group for practically everything. But professionally, though, LinkedIn was wonderful for me, both harnessing my existing network, but then connecting with people and meeting new people. And I would say also, as you grow the network, take the opportunities that come your way. So, for example, I joined the British Chamber of Commerce in Singapore. I connected when I was in Chile. I connected with a number of embassy contacts, so the British embassy, but also got to know quite a few people at the Australian embassy and the New Zealand embassy through sort of friends of friends and so forth. But that's a good way to get to know the sort of international community and the English-speaking community, if you're like me and not blessed with with language skills. So yeah, I would say sort of do that research and then harness the networks and then just get stuck in. I think at the beginning, I go into it with the spirit of say yes to everything at the start. Meet as many people, try as many different things, explore the area and so forth. And then, as you get to know it more and more people, you can then start to be more selective. But I almost started, I sort of went at it with gusto and, met lots of people and did lots of things because I just wanted to, as quickly as possible, feel like I had people there, because actually one thing, if you've never done an international relocation before, you forget every single time, but that first month or 6 weeks is really, really hard. And, you know, when you arrive, you're jet lagged, you're probably in temporary accommodation, you haven't got all your stuff, you maybe haven't started work yet, or you know, in my case, you're setting up a business and you're in that kind of very, you know, sort of you know, ambiguous stage, and you haven't got any friends, so you're also lonely. And that is really tough. So I think, you know, be kind to yourself, and you know, give yourself, you know, the headspace that it will be hard at the beginning and it takes a little while. And I think that's why I threw myself into everything, really, just so that it didn't feel too long before I had friends. And a tip with that is find other people who are arriving at the same time. It's much harder to break into friendship groups of people that have been there for a long time, but there'll always be people arriving in a new country at the same time as you. So kind of use Facebook and LinkedIn to find other newcomers, and connect and support each other. And that really helped me, and that's where I made a lot of my really good friends.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you get that adrenaline rush initially when you're first there that can sometimes take a bit of a dip, and you need to know you're going to come back out the other side, and it's good. I think one unexpected benefit of COVID and the lockdowns in Singapore's borders being shut is we know Singapore really well. And I've explored all corners of it.
We've explored all
the
of
different
Singapore.
parts.
And all our new friends got locked down too, so everybody wanted to go for a walk with you in the Botanic Gardens. They weren't flying off here, there and everywhere, which is, you know, I know it is absolutely different to normal times, isn't it?
It is, but there are some good things as well.
Definitely. Yeah.
So great. Well, thank you so much, Ellie. You've given a lot of insight in terms of your moves and some of the things you've learned. I know that, like me, you've loved those and learned a lot, and it's something that I've definitely got appetite to do again and to learn again, and just hope that us sharing will then bring more ideas to other people as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's you know, I guess my parting tip would be, if you ever get the chance to do an international move, you know, seize it, go and do it, because even though there are lots of challenges, the benefits far outweigh the challenges, and actually it really does develop your resilience, and you like, once you've managed to do that, life gets a lot easier in other places. So yes, it's a great thing to do. Highly recommend it.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
My pleasure, Jo. Thank you.
Take care.